Merry Christmas! Or maybe your Christmas was a little less than merry. I know that there are a lot of different reactions to this time of year. Some people love Christmas time. The lights, the music, the way you can eat 5,000 cookies and no one says anything about it. For others, this time of year is a little more difficult. It reminds us of the people no longer around our trees. It's frantic as we try to get everything done, from the food to the presents, and you have no idea how your family will react to politics or the new partner that your cousin brought home. I think it would be fair to say that the Holy Family felt both ends of this extreme during Jesus' birth. It's a heck of a story. Angels coming to humans, unexplained pregnancy, a big trip, no space for them, the agony of childbirth, the beauty of a new baby, an unexpected baby shower, and then they get hit with just one more thing. They have to flee because Herod is a paranoid dictator. 4 days after Christmas, and we're already reminded why we need the good news of Christ retold every year, every day, and every hour. The Christmas story is not quite as sentimental as we usually think. It's a world where children are murdered because they were born in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a world not unlike the one we live in now, where families are forced to flee desperate situations, and rulers are more concerned with maintaining their power than protecting their people. As we begin to take the lights down, take the trees to the curb, and clean up the wrapping paper strewn around the living room, the world once again reminds us what it is. Yes, there is hope and new life and the birth of a baby who called us to a different world. And yet, we still live in that old world, full of killer rulers, pain, tragedy, and despair. The silent night, holy night, seems to be the eye of the hurricane of life. I don't know if all of you are familiar with hurricanes. If you aren't from the East Coast, I think you just hear about the destructive power, and that's about it. In Mississippi, you learn a lot about hurricanes. It's not if a hurricane will hit this year, it's when and how bad. I think the most interesting aspect of a hurricane is the eye of the storm. It's a spot right in the middle where the air pressure drops and there's an unnatural calm. No clouds, no rain, no wind in the eye of the hurricane. It's the only spot of reprieve from the storm that you just went through and the rest of the storm that's coming behind. Jesus was born in the eye of a hurricane, one of many that he would experience throughout his life. It seems he never shied away from a single one of them. Most often, he found the eye within the storm of his life and lived into moments of peace and laughter and joy whenever he could find them. The other interesting thing is that because of all his experience with storms, he got really good at dealing with them, at finding moments to enjoy the eye and helping other people prepare and navigate their own storms and advocating for better protection against them. Edmund Steimel, a preaching professor, often reminded his students that Christmas stories are not children's stories. They are adult stories for adult Christians. I think often we make the mistake of thinking many stories in the Bible are just nice, happy stories with great endings and morals for people. We teach how nice it is that Jesus calls the poor and meek blessed, forgetting that he does so because he knows what it's like to be poor and meek in a world that seeks to exploit and destroy both of those things. We talk about how nice it is that he was eating with sinners, forgetting that the marginalized are his neighbors, and those meals further angered the powers that be. We teach how nice it is to take communion, forgetting that it was the last thing he did with his friends on the night before he knew he would be captured and murdered from the same type of paranoid leadership that wanted him dead in the first years of his life. So often we focus on the eye of the storm, missing the full extent of the wind and rain raging around the stories of Jesus. Our Advent series and daily devotions focused on the full stories, the places, the people, the experiences, and the stories we all come from, the things in our lives that shaped us. A few people reference their storms as things that had shaped them. One of the things we learn most clearly from Jesus is that being a Christian comes nowhere close to exempting us from the storms of life. In fact, because of being a Christian, we should expect the hurricanes to come. Now, when I say we should expect the storms and chaos, I don't mean you should expect persecution because the world hates Christians, as some people believe, but it's because, as Christians, we should seek out storms like Jesus so that we can share our knowledge of how to weather them, our survival techniques. Jesus' most formative years were shaped by having to flee to another country as refugees to escape a tyrannical ruler who wanted him dead. I think the same woman who sung from his birth that God showed great strength by scattering the proud, brought down the powerful from their thrones, lifted up the lowly, filled the hungry with good things, and sent the rich away empty, probably also sang to her new baby lullabies. And when he was older, told him about their crazy family history and all the things that they had been through, and the ways that that gave him the experience to stand up for other people who went through crazy things. And that's who Jesus became, a man shaped by a strong and determined mother, a man shaped by the experiences of poverty, marginalization because of his religious tradition, a member of a group who knew little other than oppression. He took all of that and figured out how to stand when others could not, how to advocate for people who could not speak for themselves, and how to call out oppression and injustice in whatever forms they presented themselves. All those storms in his life made him fearless and committed to helping others through their own storms. And those often took many different forms. Often, it was the figurative storm of oppression and pain that so many faced. Other times, it was the literal storms that worried his friends, often fishermen. Later in his gospel, Matthew tells us that one night, the disciples were awoken by a storm on the Sea of Galilee. They were frantic, rushing around, crying, terrified for their lives. They came to Jesus, "We're gonna die! Do something!" He sighed and reminded them to breathe. They've done this before. They know how storms work. He is with them in the midst of it. They will be okay. They tie down their sails and tighten their ropes, and the storm becomes a little less terrifying. Often, I think that's all we need. A reminder that there is someone with us through it all. A reminder that people have done this before. Sometimes we have been through these things before, and we can do it again. What has been most helpful to me throughout my life is the presence and assurance of mentors and friends who sat with me in my grief or pain or confusion and simply said, "I know what it's like. It sucks, but eventually you will make it through this and you will be okay. We can do it together." Like Jesus, Christians are not called to simply weather their storms and yell, "Woohoo!" when we make it to the other side. We are called to find the lost and the left behind, bring them to the eye of the hurricane, to take a moment, to sit with them, take a good look around at what is going on. Breathe for a moment, and then rise again to face the rest of the storm, this time hand in hand. Jesus did not ask for storms, nor does anyone, I imagine. But the truth is, the storms will come to all of us. It's what we do with those storms that matters. The painful truth of the world is that the winds will swirl and the rains will fall. There will be divorces and deaths and pain and heartache. Rulers will care more about protecting their power than their people. Capitalism will promote poverty. Tornadoes and fires will affect homes. Sometimes those things will hurt us. Sometimes the people that we love, and sometimes people that we don't even know. But just like Jesus, we can use the storms and the pain and the heartbreak in our lives to help others through their own. The storms get easier if we have someone to weather them with, someone to hold our hand through the thunder and lightning, someone who tells the story of their pain as an instruction manual to help others get through the same thing. I read a story on Facebook recently about a young woman who had grown up poor. One Christmas, her mother came to her and said that because they had such small money for this year's Christmas, she would get a single nail polish as her gift so that her younger siblings could get a couple of toys. She nodded her head and told her mother that that made sense. She didn't need anything more, but she was still sad that all she would be able to open was a nail polish. When Christmas morning came, she opened her present and watched as her younger siblings unwrapped their meager toys. And then the doorbell rang. When they went to open it, they found a tree that, instead of leaves, had dollar bills tied around it. Someone had seen their struggles and had given them the opportunity for a better Christmas. Years later, her family was doing much better. Her mother had married a generous man, and he had an idea for Christmas. Instead of getting things for each other, they would find toys and presents for an impoverished family in their city. When the time came, they wrapped all of the presents and stacked them on the porch of the new family, and the young woman's father told her that she should be the one to ring the doorbell because she was the fastest. After she made it back to the car, they watched in secret as a surprised family cried out with joy to find their Christmas miracle. It would have been easy for that family to decide that they could make up for the Christmases when they didn't have enough by having a big one now that they did. Instead, they remembered the storm that they had been through and helped to alleviate someone else's. It would have been easy, too, for Jesus to decide it would be best if he stayed out of trouble, blended into the background. His mother had been through enough in his early years. Why not make life a little easier for her and just be a normal man who worked and had a family? But those early storms caused him not to retreat, but to feel an overwhelming compassion and empathy for the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. Those were his people. He was one of them, and they were a part of him. He knew how those storms would blow, how those rulers would continue to squash them, how they would need to continue to flee, and that sometimes even then, the storms would be overwhelming. Despite it all, Jesus remained vulnerable to the pains of the world. He let himself feel the heartbreak and the loss of storm damage and led his people with those things in mind. When he became a leader, he used his power to advocate for the vulnerable and the hurting, a use of power that we could all learn from. It takes great courage to experience hurt and difficulty, particularly in the early years of life. But then to be able to grow up and to remain sensitive to those pains for others, sometimes causing our own to ache a little. That's what Jesus did. He saw those experiences as strength, as a way of seeing the world more clearly, living half in the hurricane and half in the eye of the storm, having a full sense of the workings of the world, the joy and the pain, the beauty and the devastation. This is the miracle Jesus brings to us all, a full view of the world as it is, an understanding that this is the way it is now, and a vision of what it could be if all people stood together in times of storm and chaos, rejoicing in the moments of calm and fortifying themselves in the times of raging wind. That's the type of life we remember each year on Christmas Eve. That's the life we are called to. When the lights turn down low, the world outside is dark and full of storms. But within the church, standing in the eye of a hurricane of a world, we are reminded that there are still miracles. Babies are still born. Strangers turn into families. People decide to walk with each other through hardships and difficulty, and God is with us. John's gospel tells us that the light shines in the darkness, and the dark has not overcome it. The light of Christ is passed down through the centuries and around to every person. Illumination and warmth fill the room. The calm stillness reminds us that there is hope for a different world, imagined by a baby boy, held by a fleeing family, where the kingdom of God becomes a reality. The full story of Jesus' birth, life, death, and resurrection reminds us that our experiences and stories, our storms, matter to God and to others who need our wisdom and our endurance when they are affected by those same raging winds. And even in the midst of the hurricane, there is an eye waiting to give us reprieve, a chance to breathe, to pass a light to someone, to hold a hand, and to catch a glimpse of the kingdom of God. May it be so.
Blessed be the